So, for today's project, something different, we're going to have a look at this Samsung HD television that someone gave me for repair. Let's give her a quick plug in here and show you what it does. You plug it in, and the power immediately starts to cycle on and off. And it just keeps doing that, it never turns on, never does anything else, just keeps cycling. So I'm betting it's probably an issue with the power supply board, quite possibly some bad capacitors, which rather pathetically the industry still suffers from. So let's pull it apart and have a look and see what I can do with it. So the first thing we're going to do here, the first step, is to take the bezel off so we can get to the back of this sucker. So, there's usually a series of screws around the outside, in this case there's one in the middle here. And it doesn't look like I have to take the ones off from the panel. In some older televisions you have to take off a series of screws that are on the input panel, but this one doesn't look like I have to. So, let's start at her here. Now, I should note also that I did a little research on this problem before I started here. I always like to Google a problem I'm having before I go to repair it. I mean, like I said, 9 times out of 10 it's a bad capacitor anyways, but sometimes you get a little more information on the problem, and that's always interesting. Turns out that there's a known defect with Samsung HD televisions. There's 2 capacitors. I couldn't find exactly which 2, I didn't really look all that hard. I'm sure with a little more research I can find exactly what 2 they are, but I'm sure they'll be pretty easy to spot. But there's 2 undersized capacitors on the power boards on these that go bad and cause the power to cycle on and off repeatedly. So, any luck, I'll change out 2 capacitors and that's really good as new, and save the friend the trouble of and the expense of buying a new one. So as you can see, I just laid down on my workbench here on my desk more accurately on a nice soft towel so as not to scratch up the screen, and now I'm just going to continue on and pull out the remainder of these screws. And I should also mention that while I feel that anybody can do this, you should be aware, of course, with anything there are risks involved. There's always a chance that something bad could happen, but as long as you're relatively careful, you should be just fine. There we go. Off she comes. Give you a little bit better view of what's going on right now. So your basic, every LCD monitor, television, what have you, has 2 basic main boards in them. They will all have this main power supply board here, which is of course covered in many warnings. Then you have the video board here, which is all the circuitry on it that controls the on-screen menu functions, the inputs, all that sort of thing. In addition to both your analog digital video board, your power board, is you also have what's called an inverter board here, and this is what actually drives the LCD, this is what drives the backlight for the actual LCD display. The LCD display is controlled, as you can see here, through a ribbon cable that runs out of the analog digital board over and into the display itself. So, just as I suggested, after a quick cursory glance at the power board here, you can see that this capacitor here is bulging and blown, this one's bulging and blown, and I imagine these other 3 are probably on their way out as well. They're Samwa brand capacitors, which are notoriously crappy. I don't know why companies like Samsung still use them. I mean, you're paying for a good, well-built television. I mean, in general, I think Samsung are some of the better built televisions you can buy. The picture quality on them is excellent. But I mean, for a few dollars more, you can have a better brand capacitor in them that'll do the job. So next up, we're going to pull out this board and remove them and replace them. So now we're going to remove various plugs that go into the power board here. They'll be two that feed the inverter board power. Here's another one there that feeds the power. I have a couple from the main power jack, which is right here. Got your ground, and your hot and neutral wires. A couple that feed the analog digital board. Now 9 times out of 10, all these plugs are keyed, so they will not fit in anywhere else. But if you're someone that often forgets or just want to take note, what I've done before is I've actually written on the inside of these televisions with a magic marker where each one goes on the metal panel. Since it's inside, no one's ever going to see it, and whoever opens up next time might thank you for it. Or with digital cameras, you can just take a picture of this and throw it up on your computer if you get confused, and have a look and see. So it looks like there's just 4 screws to pull this out, so take those out. Looks like there's 6. Never force anything with an LCD television. Plastic clips that hold a lot of these things together are extremely delicate and break very easily. If I ever get stuck, I usually just look it up online. If I can't find a service manual, odds are someone else has taken it apart before and made the mistakes and throw it up on a website somewhere for you to read and learn from. See, there's a 7th screw there I missed. Yeah, there we go. So there it is, and like I said, you can see pretty clearly here these two are bulging and bad. SAM-wall capacitors, if ever there's a doubt and you see them in there, they're junk. Just replace them. So other than the screwdriver I use to take it apart, the basic tools you'll need to repair one of these are some rosin core electronic solder. Do not use plumbing solder, it won't work, it'll corrode. Bad things will happen, not with your time. Size this spool I think was $7 or $8 at Radio Shack about 8 or 9 years ago now, and I still haven't gone through it all. This is a pneumatic solder removal tool. It sucks up the molten solder off the board. Press the button and it sucks her up. It's adequate. Someday I'd like to get an actual desoldering iron, electronic desoldering iron, but for the time being, and since desoldering irons are quite expensive, this does the job. Then of course, a soldering iron itself. Do not use those instant-on soldering guns. They get far too hot. You'll fry your circuit board. Has to be a soldering iron. In this case, I think this one's, let's see, this is a 35 watt. It's adequate for this. I do have a more heavy-duty one. It's a little hotter. I think it's something closer to 50 watts for any of the bigger components that I can't get apart. Okay, so first things first, we're going to remove the bad capacitors. One, definitely bulging, bottom's pushed out. It's a 10 volt 2200. I did see that there is an official Samsung repair for this problem, and it seems what they've been doing is taking these 10 volt 2200 caps and replacing them with a 25 or 35 volt 2200 cap. I'm not sure if they're using the same brand or not, but it seems that it is a factory defect. Simply poor design. Yep, you can see it's definitely blown, all mounted up, dark, top squirting out, bottom's pushed out and bulged. It's a piece of crap. Let's remove the rest of the solder from the board here. So ideally what you do is you replace these with power supply rated caps. But since this is a friend of mine and I'm doing this for as little as possible, I'm just going to go through my parts bin and see if I got some leftovers from an old VCR or something that I can pull out and replace these with. Since the rest of the caps look fine, so let's look for a pair. 2200s, if you're doing this for a customer or you want a repair that you know would last forever and only wanted to do it once, what you really do is recap the entire board, go through, pick out all the little ones, and replace them all with high-end capacitors. Alright, so I dug through my stock of old boards and things, and I didn't have any high-end caps to put in here, but I did find a pair of 25 volt 2200 microfarad caps. So at the very least they are definitely an upgrade from the undersized 10 volt ones there. This being a power supply, oftentimes you can replace caps if you don't have the same size with ones of a higher rating. Voltage, as long as you go higher, it doesn't matter, but oftentimes you go higher voltage, you get bigger caps. These are slightly bigger in size. You can see that they are both wider as well as thicker than the originals. However, it looks like they'll fit just fine. So we'll put them in and see what happens. Always make sure to line up the negative and the positive side of the cap the same way around that you took them out. There's usually a shaded section on the board. I'm not sure if I can show you this or not. Right in here you see how these are where the caps came out of these two spots. The shaded half on the board is 9 times out of 10 the negative. You can always compare it to some of the other caps on the board to make double check. I can't remember if it's Asus or Gigabyte. There's one brand of motherboard that flips it around, but almost every other board that I've ever worked on uses the shaded section as the negative. But just double check or watch me take the old ones out just to be sure. Okay, you may have to bend the legs a little bit in your new cap to get them to line up. These ones were a little bit wider space because it's a little bit of a bigger cap. Usually the higher the voltage you put in, the bigger the capacitor is. So these being a little bit bigger than the originals, they are a little bit larger. Okay, so now there it is. 2 new caps installed. These other ones aren't bulging yet. They look okay. They're actually a higher voltage. They're 25 volt caps, so they're probably alright for the time being. Nothing else looks bad or bulging, and there's no heat marks on the board. So I'm going to put it back in and see if it works. So we'll just put it back in the same way it came out, which is this way. Side note also, if you're working on something smaller, more enclosed like a VCR or stereo, and you do happen to use larger capacitors than the ones that were original to the device, make sure that the tops of them won't hit the back of the panel when you put it back together and possibly short out. If it is a case where you feel you should, or the official repairers use a larger capacitor and there's just no room, you can always lay the capacitor over on its side and use some and keep the leads longer. So got it back together, minus the back panel. I usually leave it off until I test it here, and just hit the power button and see what happens. And there it is. Good as new. For the low cost of free in my case, since I had the old capacitors laying around, pulled them out of some old componentry. And it should be good. And there you go. Next time your LCD monitor or LCD television won't turn on, that's how you fix it. 9 times out of 10, there'll be a pair of bad capacitors on that power supply board. Usually you're only looking at $25 to $30 at most to replace all of them. And occasionally I've noticed in particularly Samsung's LCD monitors, there's also a small fuse next to the main power supply capacitors that likes to go bad. So just replace that too. So like I said, you're at most $20 into parts for one of these, which is a whole lot cheaper than a television. So there you have it.